Salutations, and thank you for clicking on this video. It's another edition of Mr. Desktop and Mr. Server, and this time around we've brought in somebody who we're going to call Mr. Cloud. I'm Joe Collins. Jeremy O'Connell is here from Cyberweb Solutions, and we have Scotty D, who does work that is so sensitive and important that we can't tell you where he works, but I can tell you that he has spent 25 years in the, what do you call it?
The IT space, cloud, data center, disaster recovery, data management, protection, etc. You've touched it. I've touched it.
Exactly. Anyway, and so what we're going to talk about on today's show is we're going to sit here and we're going to ramble on a little bit about this idea that is the cloud. So I'm going to give Scotty the first shot at telling people, when you hear the word cloud, what does that really mean?
Well, let's break it down first and foremost what it is not. The cloud is not rainbows and unicorns, folks. It's really simple. It's you borrowing compute, memory, and storage from somebody else and either paying a monthly service fee or a by-the-drink fee. And those are dynamic, and it could range anywhere from here to refinancing a kingdom. So yeah, that's what it is. It's not anything magic. It's not anything to be afraid of. And we'll get into deeper topics around this on this podcast. But short and simple, it's not rainbows and unicorns. It's somebody else's computer, somebody else's storage. You're connecting to it. You're using it.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to say it's somebody else's computer, because that's what it is. So.
Yeah, exactly. It really comes down to understanding if you had the ability to take the nomenclature of cloud out of the conversation just for a second. Let's talk about your daily life, right? There's two things that most people have experienced in their life, more than two, but I'll use two as an example. One, your electricity, right? When you flip on your switch, what happens? Do you care? No. What your goal is at the end of flipping on that switch is whatever you have plugged into the set outlet actually turns on. You don't care where the electricity comes from. You don't care how it's made. Most people don't give it a second thought. Okay, so you're borrowing electricity from somebody and you're paying a fee for it. The other one is a dial tone to a phone. I know most people don't have landlines anymore. They have cell phones, but the same principle occurs, whether you turn on your smartphone and make a call or you pick up a landline and you hear a dial tone. You don't care where that dial tone is coming from. You don't care how it was constructed on the back end. You just know that you need a dial tone to make a call. Same thing with cloud.
Okay. Jeremy, what do you think about that definition of the cloud, and what is your definition?
Well, first of all, I have to say, folks, he's just embarrassed. He works for Microsoft. It just doesn't work today.
No, he does not work for Microsoft.
I don't work for Microsoft.
I'm just kidding, folks.
I have interviewed for Microsoft, but I walked away from opportunities. But no, I don't work for them.
Had to throw that in there. And by the way, folks, where I am, just so you know, there's a thunderstorm kind of approaching, so if you hear some rumbling from my side, that's what it is. What do I think, to answer the question that Joe tossed my way? Well, I would say that's a pretty accurate summation. I mean, obviously a cloud is, that term just gets thrown around so much. It's really the internet. It's basically what it is. It's you've got some type of service, you're out there wanting space or something. I mean, it could be obviously server-wise, or it could be something like a VoIP service. Advantage is a cloud for VoIP. It's just basically, as Joe and Scott has said, it's just you're renting space or you're getting some type of service that's not local to you. It's not in the building where you are. And so you are paying a fee, an hour fee, a monthly fee, or possibly even doing some type of annual fee to get some type of service delivered to you. I like that description. I mean, because it could be a phone, it could be either cell phone or VoIP, such as, like I said, Vonage, Magic Jack, whatever, and it can also refer to things such as hosting. And if you really want to say cloud, as it's become, I mean, even traditional hosting, quote unquote, that goes back into the late 90s was the quote cloud, because you would often get shared storage at like host monsters or even GeoCities back in the late 90s, and that could be termed the cloud. So you can even get networking through the cloud. So I kind of have grown to really dislike that term, but that's what it is.
I'm with you, Jeremy. For me, it's remove the word cloud out of the conversation. Let's talk about what it is you're trying to accomplish. And it's I need compute, I need storage, I need networking. And in cloud, it could also be used synonymous with virtualization on site, right? So if you've got any virtualization at all, whether it be in your private home or your business office, that's a form of cloud, because you don't have physical devices that are being accessed directly by the end user. So in a business environment, you could have virtualization, be it Hyper-V, be it VMware, be it Zen, OpenStack, anything like that. The end user doesn't know exactly what they're accessing. The applications think they're sitting on physical. The end user thinks they're accessing a physical device out there, because to the compute devices, they don't know any different.
That's
right?
That's a very interesting definition. So would you consider, let's say you have an enthusiast who has a computer and they have VMware or VirtualBox installed, and they install 5 virtual machines, is that a form of a cloud?
Well, again, the term cloud is so skewed in the way people think of it. You know, if you ask most industry people, they will say cloud is either private or public, hosted by somebody else.
Right. So, yeah, so I guess maybe that you would say that you had a virtual machine in the cloud if you would rent a server, let's say, from a company like DigitalOcean.
Sure.
Where you have your, that's basically what that is a VM in the cloud, and then you can do whatever you want with it, and you access it by SSH and remote desktop and whatever else you do to actually get to those things. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I just feel like there's an expansion to the term cloud, where you could say, well, what is cloud? Cloud is borrowing time and resources from somebody else. So could you say virtualization on a local desktop is cloud? No, not really, because you own the resources, right? But in the same sense, the architecture that's built around doing virtualization locally versus doing virtualization somewhere else, it's more often than not going to be the same platform that you're sitting on. So if you're very familiar with VMware, you might be doing some local VM on your desktop. If you're in a business environment, you might be expanding it to some other elements. But virtualization is virtualization, you know. But the hypervisor itself will differ from brand A to brand B to brand C, and how they interoperate and interrelate with each other might cause some challenges as well.
Okay. Well, the next thing that I want to talk about, and I want to jump into this because I have had animated conversations with both of these gentlemen on this subject. I am, first of all, just let me tell you guys, I am very suspicious of using somebody else's computer. And,
Second.
And I just, the thing is that my personal feeling on it is that I'm always afraid they're going to be able to pull it out from under me at any moment, because, and I feel like that.
Define pull it out from underneath of me.
Well, okay, let's say that I have an account on a system, and I have sensitive data there, okay? And then somebody comes along and they steal my identity, and I am unable to make a payment to actually pay the service. They suspend the service, the account goes poof. By the time I get my finances straight, where's my data? That's a very extreme thing to say there. Also, the other thing that worries me about it, quite honestly, is, okay, I am I am all into Google. We're using Google Hangouts right now, but I am all into Google. Google knows everything about me because of the Google services that I use, all right? And that always makes me a little bit nervous. And let's say that you have a hosting provider, a data provider, something like that, that is not a Google grade company but something smaller. What happens if they get sold? What happens to my data? They're telling me that everything is safe and anonymous. What happens if that company gets sold or something happens? So those are my concerns, and I'm going to give Jeremy first go on answering this question.
Well, actually, I'm kind of faced with what you're saying, and I have some solutions for that. And I guess later, if you want to talk about the privacy aspect, we can. I'm like you. I don't trust the cloud except for just general hosting, because at our company, I'm not going to run multiple internet connections and have really beefy generators to keep the servers online and have redundant paths. I mean, I'm definitely and have always farmed that out to some other entity that's a traditional data center that has 5, 6, 8 different pathways or whatever, and then can go for often days on diesel fuel. And I'm just not going to build that locally. So I kind of have a dual, well, I guess, outlook on this. For my personal data, I keep it off the cloud. Now, when you were talking about as much as possible, like you, Joe, I am plugged into Google somewhat, although I roll a lot of my own solutions, or at least use open source running on local servers for even my home. In my own home, I've downloaded a chat service, which is an open chat service, and my family talks on a server that sits in our house that I can reach over and touch, and all our chatting doesn't even go out to IRC or anything. All our local chatting is on our equipment, open source vetted, on actually running on a Sun Microsystem server that I actually picked up. So as far as though what you're saying, for space, I actually have this situation I'm dealing with at CyberWeb. We were with a hosting provider that I liked, and I'm not going to mention names, and then they actually sold themselves. There's actually a new company that's acquiring them, and I don't really care for the new company that is acquiring my previous hosting provider. So I've actually been setting up new servers and with another company, totally separate, and transferring my data over to them slowly. I still have to do my email server, which is the last server to do. So that is actually something I'm faced with because I just don't trust the new provider. Now, how do I get around the fact what happens if even the new provider goes poof and it's gone? Well, I do that simply by, first of all, you mentioned, Joe, someone like stealing your account or whatever. I personally lock everything down with two-factor authentication for all my accounts. So if you have like a DigitalOcean account, you should be using two-factor. I use two-factor for my bank. I use two-factor everywhere it is. I use two-factor. As far as the data goes, I actually, as we discussed in the first introduction to myself, last recording, I actually have a Ubuntu box at a whole nother company. It's at another hosting provider that's set up, and then using rsync and ZFS, I actually back up all our critical data, our user LAN data, to another hosting provider across the country, even from that. So if even my hosting provider goes offline, the main new one, then I still have my critical user LAN data. And the odds that they're both going to go under at the same time are not that significant. And then I even download that data periodically to our local LAN and back that up. So the bottom line is, if you really care about your data, you need to be storing it in more than one places besides relying solely on someone else. Because even if you like the company today, doesn't mean they won't change a policy you won't like, and doesn't mean that later on they'll be bought out by something else. And we can get more into that, including the true privacy aspect, but obviously I'll relinquish the baton here.
Go ahead, Scott. What is your take on that?
So my take is a couple. Let's go back and let's address one thing really simple, and that is, first and foremost, let's talk about that virtualization aspect again. If you are in an enterprise space and you are doing virtualization of any kind, you're experiencing these same security avenues that you would in a cloud, right? If you are sitting in a cloud space, the security measures that are in place are the same as if they are physical. Now, mileage will vary. not all cloud providers are the same. Not all cloud infrastructure is set up exact to each other. But for the most part, your data is secure in the cloud from not only the service provider, but also other entities that might be on the same shared resources. Because for all intents and purposes, if you are in a cloud environment, you are on a multi-tenant cloud. It would be cost prohibitive for the cloud provider to give everybody their own server, their own network, their own storage. You can have that. That's called virtual private cloud or private cloud out there, but you're going to pay a premium fee to have dedicated resources to your service. But to the comments that were made around storage of data and backup and protection of data and movement of data, the biggest thing to keep in mind with cloud is portability. So you like where you're at today. You love the provider that you're giving a check to on a monthly basis, but what happens tomorrow if you want to pull up anchor and move? That lends challenges, and for the average consumer using any cloud environment, that would be extremely expensive to put infrastructure in to egress that data and ingest it into somewhere else.
Okay,
but
so
for business, it's not business. It's a whole different ball of wax in business. So I want to kind of keep that in mind as we're talking about cloud. You do have to think about it from two different separate aspects: business, personal. And so now we get into the why do you choose this one versus that one, and what makes you paranoid of the security. So let me roll into a non-techie cloud type scenario.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say.
So Joe,
let's do that.
So Joe, you're paranoid of your data sitting up in the cloud. Jeremy, you talk about having diverse platforms to sit on, and I understand that. But let's take technology out of the picture as far as clouds goes, and let's all think about something that we've done at some point in time in our life. As an adult, we've gone to a restaurant. We've ate a meal. The wait staff comes back to us. They say, "Are you done?" You say, "Yes." They said, "We'll bring your check." They bring that little plastic folded envelope to you. You slide your credit card into it or your debit card, and they take off into the back room for 15 to 20 minutes, and they bring you back a piece of paper for you to sign. Now, what did they do with your credit card between point A, point B, and point C? You don't know. But you do it without thought, and we've done it without thought for many, many years as adults. But then we talk about fear and paranoia in computing, but in our personal non-techie life, we've done it without thought. So I dare say you have to take a deep breath when it comes to cloud. Remember, it's not rainbows and unicorns. It's not something magical that's going to disappear. Now, the likelihood of a cloud provider being sold in the day and age that we're sitting in, if they're small, you're absolutely spot on. If they're a large entity that's out there, some of the big providers that are key named cloud providers that you could go out today and rent space from them, the likelihood of them disappearing tomorrow is very slim. And if they did disappear tomorrow, as far as their name goes, the infrastructure wouldn't disappear. And more often than not, on top of that, these service providers have multi-tiered protection in their infrastructure, so you don't have a single point of failure on network. You don't have a single point of failure on drives. You don't have a single point of failure on compute. So right. You have redundancy built in and around that cloud experience, but now how do you satisfy policy? How do you satisfy red tape? Because those two things typically trump and paramount the technical downfalls of cloud. It's not that they are technically impotent. These service providers have spent millions and billions of dollars on the infrastructure that you use. They're not going to risk a catastrophic failure by a single point of failure.
Oh
Because
yeah, I mean that's why you do it anyway. I mean really, I mean what it comes down to it is that if you have a business and you want offsite storage, first of all, it's going to be easier to manage if somebody else is taking care of that, and you're taking advantage of the infrastructure, which is really cool.
yeah, and just think about this. Cloud is a tool. It's not anything more than a tool. It's like a desktop operating system. And Joe, you and I have had countless conversations around this, so I'll expand on it for the listeners. A desktop is a tool. It's no more than a hammer from your local hardware store. If you ask the average user, what do you use your desktop for? Well, I fire up my browser, or I use this program, or I open up that file. You see, all of these are destinations that they're going to from the tool. You don't access cloud to say, boy, I'm on the cloud. You don't have a desktop to say, boy, I've got desktop version this or this brand that.
Hey,
you know?
You're talking to the Linux community. Many of them do. Just pointing that out.
It doesn't matter if you're Linux. It doesn't matter if you're Microsoft. It doesn't matter if you're Apple. I don't care what bigot bucket you sit in right now. I really don't care. The desktop is a tool to a destination. It's not the reason why you fire up your computer. Because if I fired up my Linux machine right now and I stared at it, it would do nothing for me.
That's a good point.
If I fired up my Apple machine and stared at it, it would not make applesauce. If I fired up my Windows machine, well, hopefully it fires up. But that's a whole nother thing.
Okay, stop. All right, I want to shift this in a different direction. I want to move somewhere.
But I have some rebuttals to some of what was said, because I even experienced some things that Scott brought up that you would think would not have occurred.
Do it.
Okay, my last provider. First of all, I'm one of those people who does care about the card, and I have thought about that. I know most people don't. I actually have used KeyPass. Everything I have has separate passwords. I even teach free courses on it and that type of thing. So I'm actually, like you said, Scott, I am not okay with that personally. I'm very, very cautious of what's going on. I don't even want wireless security systems because I don't even trust the wireless signals. As been shown with Comcast, they can be hacked and stuff. But back to your point on single points of failure. You would think that wouldn't occur, but let's take out one thing that happened recently, Delta. They actually had a major problem, and they had redundancy, and it failed. But not also that, I personally had that at our company. We were in a Chicago data center, multiple in the cloud with our hosting, and we were sitting on Ceph, which is a file system that gets spread across multiple nodes, and so it looks like to the OS that there's one storage, but actually it's split up on the different nodes. So in theory, no central point of failure. There was a backup SAN that was backing up off of the same node onto a whole nother node, onto a whole nother Ceph, and this company even had Red Hat Enterprise support. They even paid for the Red Hat Enterprise license. That's what ran the actual hardware when you got down to bare metal, which is at the end of the day, folks, so you know that's actually the machine that you can walk up and touch, the bare metal. They had Ceph fail in a way that took out thousands and thousands and thousands. They had to shut down the whole entire data center, including the backup system, for 42 hours. And we could not access our backups. We could not access our nodes. They had to get Red Hat engineers involved, and actually a patch got pushed out to everyone who was running Ceph because of this issue. The whole data center crashed, and there was data loss in that. So even though it was a cloud running on thousands of servers, there was still data loss, and the actual, again, thousands and thousands and thousands of nodes had to be taken offline. So the point of that is sometimes it can fail. Also, if you go back and look at Nest owners, which are the little thermostats, if you're not aware of that, folks, that you can plug up and they control. They had a Nest failure, and while I agree with Scott that people don't necessarily go like, oh, I want this in the cloud, as more and more services go to the cloud, there was a Nest update that knocked the Nest thermostats offline, and then suddenly there were six-figure people, I don't know, remember it was 100,000, 200,000 people could not change their thermostat because of the failure in that. And this is Google. Google owns Nest, and they had a failure. There was not great redundancy in that, at least to the point that, well, when something happened, and they pushed an update, I'm not trying to solely focus on Nest, but that can happen. And I think
Yeah.
people are going to become more aware of that as more functions move to the cloud.
And
I agree with you there. And to dovetail onto that, so as a cloud engineer, as a data center specialist, data management, DR, the root cause is what I'd be most interested in. Was the root cause at a hypervisor level? Was it truly a cloud? Was it truly an element of the virtualization stack that caused the problem? Was it a storage stack? Was it a controller card? Was it a guy with was it a guy? Yeah, was it a guy with a backhoe in the backyard that dug up a fiber?
In that case, they had an attack because they figured it out, and I asked them later on. And of course, that was an all hands on deck, and we're getting technical here. But what happened is they had the ability. It wasn't DigitalOcean, but it was a company like DigitalOcean that could spin up on demand. And as they were getting hit with an attack, and as the attack occurred, in order to respond, their company, or the software OpenStack, immediately started spinning up new cloud instances, ran out of space, and then started, it shouldn't have, and like I said, Red Hat got involved and actually issued a patch, which everyone running OpenStack should have updated, and we happen to be the unlucky few involved, and it just started overwriting data.
So it was a problem that was within the system, and
but the bottom line, at the end of the day, all of a sudden there were thousands of companies that all couldn't access. And I mean, we had backups, but we couldn't even get to our backups because they actually had to just take all that offline, do an fdisk check on every cloud, their whole entire SAN in the background, which was running, all the cloud instances, and repair the damage. Although there still was data loss, and we were one of the companies that got involved. Some of our data just got corrupted, and then the backups got even hosed, even though they were on another system, because they were running Ceph themselves, going to, in theory, another part, but the way it was engineered in the background, and we couldn't even get our backups at that point because with them, I mean, we had other backups, but we couldn't even get to our backups with them that were stored on another system because, again, they just had to take all their SANs down, and it was pretty nasty on that. And Red Hat wrote a patch and, like I said, pushed it out so that way Ceph wouldn't just start, when it filled up its data pool, it wouldn't just start overriding itself. It shouldn't have done that, obviously, but it did. And I think that's something, as we move more and more to the cloud, that's going to become a possibility of people becoming more aware. Well, it is going to become. People are going to become more aware of when things crash and go down on them, such as the Nest situation. They're going to be like, oh, gosh, now I don't have an internet connection. Now I can't. I mean, how many things now do you have to activate online, even hardware related?
Good.
Right.
And stop. Everybody stop, because that's exactly, you want to stop at that point, and I want to change direction because thus far we have talked about people who are using cloud for business, hosting websites, holding data, stuff like that. Great. I want to take this and I want to turn it a little bit toward the average consumer. I want to start
like
talking.
Nest, that's an average consumer. Nest is people
right.
run it. You're just
okay, so I'm just going to throw out a couple of things, and I'm going to turn you loose. Okay, and number one, okay Google. Number two, Cortana. Number three, Siri.
Run.
These are applications that quote unquote access the quote unquote cloud. All right. And there's a lot of stuff that we hear it all the time about how, okay, like for instance, Cortana in Windows 10 and OK Google, every time you talk to that thing, it's storing everything that you say on a server somewhere else. Now, we've already talked about the credit card type thing. We've talked about that. But, that makes me, why are these people, it's like everything we do on a computer, if it is at all connected to the internet, we have these lovely services that, oh, this is so cool. It's like Star Trek, like computer, what's this? That's great, but should people be a little bit nervous about the fact that this thing is listening to you and it's storing all this information about you?
Well, everybody can take their aluminum hats off for a second because it's the world we live in. It's services that you have. If you go in any modern car today, there are microphones and there are speakers built into every modern car today. conspiracy theorists could, ring up a bell of all the plausibilities that could be used against them on that. Now, I do understand the anxiety wrapped around like Cortana or the Amazon devices that are out there. And I don't even know the name. Echo.
Yeah, Echo.
All of these devices that have the capability of doing voice activation that need a phrase to activate the response feature of that device. All of those have been around for a while. Siri was an app before it was a native tool embedded into Apple devices. I remember in the original Apple iPhone 3, when I had that device, the Siri service was an app, right? So it's been around for a while. Now, your paranoia to that service is really going to be personal to each person individually. I don't think that there's a fear in it, because telephone services do it all the time. When you pick up your phone and you're talking through a voice automated system, it's listening to every word you say, it's analyzing it, and it's determining can it use that phrase to give you a response. So, it's not just a computer. Again, rip out technology in the sense of a computer out of your dialogue for a second, and think about all of the things that you do without a second thought. And you've been doing similar experiences for most, if not all, your life at some level that would be relatable to current technology. Now, am I worried about my phone or a game system or something like that analyzing what I'm saying on a 24-hour basis? Well, go throw your smart TV out of the window as well. Get rid of your Xfinity remote that listens to you because it's got a built-in microphone. There are so many things with microphones in them nowadays that, again, you can put your aluminum hat on and conspiracy theory to your eyeballs fall out of your head. But the reality is these things have been around. These things are going to be around. You either can adapt to them or crawl into a cave and forget about technology. And definitely, while you're doing that, unplug every device from your house, because if you know about the vampire tap for electricity pull, it's the same theory. There's always something connected. It's always something there. So learn how to integrate with it. Understand, educate yourself to the service. Jeremy, you made a good point earlier about the Nest thermostat. A lot of people don't understand that, hey, in order to truly use Nest the way that it's supposed to be intended to be used as a consumer-based product, you need to give it access to your internet. You need to have, in some cases, depending on your ISP, port forwarding so that you can start to report things out. Go on the outside of your house today. Guess what's on the outside on most homes today? A smart meter. Why? Because it's tracking everything you do, and it's doing big data on the back end to data mine that out and figure out trends and reports the way that they can sell more goods and services. So, you know what I'm saying? The paranoia can only get you so far before you have to set into reality to go, you know what? As long as I can educate myself on what that is, and understand the back end, not just the front end, the pretty little bulb that sits on the side of the wall called Nest. It looks great, but understand how Nest works. Understand why you might want to integrate that into your house versus, oh, I'm just going to go out because I want a thermostat that I can automatically set with my phone. Well, that's the problem and the arrogance of most consumers. They don't think about the overall experience in what it's doing, how it's doing, why it's doing it. And it goes back to what I said earlier. When you flip on the switch, people don't care where that electricity comes up. When you pick up the phone, you just want the dial tone, right? You just want it to work. You don't want to think about that. You like how the sausages tastes, but you don't want to see how the sausage is made. But when you find out how the sausage is made, I don't like eating sausage anymore, right? Well, you like sausage yesterday, right? So forget about the paranoia today.
Okay, so you go, Jeremy.
Well, I am obviously going to put on my tinfoil hat then, according to Scott. I don't accept what these companies are doing. In fact, I flatly reject what they're doing. I don't think it is a conspiracy theory or being paranoid. I think I agree that most people don't know or care. I totally understand that. As far as the credit card machine goes, just a little back tick there, I'm glad that you're seeing some of these things like Zosk where you don't have to hand over your credit card. But if my credit card gets compromised, it's my credit card, which is annoying. If my hard drive gets compromised, there are serious, serious ramifications in that. So you can't, I don't agree at all that you can compare Apple, you're not comparing apples to apples there. As far as I totally agree with Scott on the fact that, yeah, sure, you pick up your phone, you call, there's some, you've got, they're recording. The NSA listens for keywords. It gets flagged. We all know that. That's been going on for decades and decades and decades. It's gotten more sophisticated, obviously. If you're in your car, definitely smart car. Well, I don't all that. The cars has more technology. Let's put it that way. All these quote smart devices, and quote unquote. So, but you're in your car a certain length of time. What I don't appreciate, and I flatly reject, are things like Cortana that are now just going to be actively, with the anniversary update, just be listening to you all the time. I'm not okay with that. And yes, my Xfinity remote might be listening to me all the time. Guess what? I don't have Xfinity. I wouldn't have Xfinity. You couldn't give it to me for free. In fact, I don't even have traditional cable. I am all streaming services. So I can control as a user what I want them to do. So I don't think just because a company is mining data from you that we should just, I don't think you should lose sleep over it, but I don't think people should just blindly accept it and be like, well, they're doing it anyway, that's okay. That to me is a complete cop-out too. And yes, we have smartphones and so forth that are listening to us, and that gets to be very hairy. That's why personally I am hoping things like Ubuntu Touch are going to, and they are starting to get better, they don't have that built in. I can choose to run Linux, which does not have a Cortana-like service built in. Now, I agree with Scott totally that people need to understand, and they don't. In fact, a lot of people, when I try and tell them stuff like this, they go like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. But when you start having something like Cortana, and I'm not just trying to single out Cortana, there's Echo that was mentioned from Amazon, which is a similar device. You go to buy that off Amazon and plug that up, and it's always listening. That is going up to, say, Microsoft servers. We know that Microsoft cooperates with the government. So strictly from a constitutional, well, I am more constitutionally based from the United States, and it's like if you're saying things, that should be private in your home. I don't believe that we should just willy-nilly as a society, and we're doing it, just give up our privacy. If something's sitting there constantly broadcasting to the internet listening, because you're not saying the key phrase, okay, Google or Cortana now, it's just going to actively be listening to you. It is now broadcasting that up to the internet. That's not parent, it's just doing that. That's what it's doing. And I agree with Scott, that's understanding the underlying technology.
Okay, so I'm sorry, go ahead, got another point?
Then that means it's being recorded. And we don't know how long Microsoft's storing it. And Microsoft could say, well, we only store it for 24 hours. They're not letting anyone vet that. They're not letting anyone double check that. I haven't seen any third parties come in there and say, yes, Microsoft's only storing it for this long. And it just goes back to the emails. I don't trust emails as far as sending any sensitive information. But just recently, I don't remember the specifics, but someone thought they had deleted their email from Yahoo. Turns out Yahoo went in for the U.S. government and retrieved those deleted messages. And of course, that's again understanding the underlying technology. Let's face it, every provider backs up their email. I don't. I roll my own email systems for that reason, which obviously I understand most people can't do. But I think you're going to see sort of two lines of paths here. You're going to see people who do care about stuff like privacy, who just, yes, I can't control everything. I personally understand that. I can't control it as more cameras come out there in public, and in some ways that's there's good and bad on that. But I don't have to just accept the Windows paradigm. I don't have to accept the Apple paradigm, and I flatly reject those paradigms. I can pick Linux, again, which does not have that built in. And so I think you're going to see people who don't care, don't know, and that will be the masses, going down that path because they don't know or care, they don't understand the underlying technology, and then you're going to see a tangent of those who do care and are trying to limit that. I can't stop every company from getting data from me, but I can sure as produce that, and I don't think that's a tinfoil hat, because once that information's out on the internet, the cloud, whatever you want to call it, you can't get it back. And so who's to say you say something and in a mad stance, you're having an argument and you utter something, it's being picked up by Cortana, uploaded to the internet, recorded, and later on a government agency hears that and gets a hold of that, or you have a divorce, or some altercation happens and the police show up, and then they go to, oh, Cortana's been listening, let's go see what Microsoft has on that. Oh, you said X, Y, Z, and you didn't really mean it, you were just mad, you were frustrated. In the past, we have had constitutional protections in the United States for that, and I just don't agree that that's a tinfoil hat scenario.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that people don't understand here is the fact that if you've ever seen that old movie Minority Report, that was way off in the future.
Yeah, it was Tom Cruise.
And Tom Cruise couldn't get away from anybody because everywhere he went, it knew exactly what he was doing. And so, I mean, that is definitely the reality we are heading into. Like it or not, that's the way it is.
Well, and that's my point, Joe. It's you can have a level of reservation, right? You can have a level of question towards any service, but the reality is this is the world we live in. We're not sitting back in stone eyes, bearskins, and pigeons running messages across the
yeah, but hold on, wait a minute, second. Hold on one second. I think that the point that's being, yes, you can say that. That's absolutely true. But as we roll along here, we are living in a society that we have this incredible technology that I don't think anybody really knows how to use yet.
I agree, 100%.
I don't think we. And I think that we have this thing that we've come up with called the internet, which is the most amazing communications device on the planet. Most people use it to share pictures of cats on Facebook
and play Pokemon Go.
Exactly, in Pokemon Go, we have this incredibly powerful.
Which, by the way, is data mining you.
Of course,
yes.
I would never touch Pokemon Go, ever.
You see, okay, so we're talking about that, and then the thing is here is that I think what people are concerned, first of all, I mean, you have this weird kind of curve that goes on. You start out with people who don't know anything about the internet, and they're not very concerned about privacy, and then as it goes up, as you learn a little bit more, now people tend to get really concerned, then they don't get concerned. It's kind of weird. There's a curve that goes on. And it's like almost when you get to the other side of it, it's like what Scott said. Very important point that he said is if you're going to use a service and it has a EULA agreement, you ought to read it. Yeah. Because in that EULA, I did a video on YouTube that was just, and I'm going to tell you, it is the most controversial video I've ever posted. And the only thing I did in that video was read the EULA for Windows 10. I went through it line by line. I never went to the parts that referred to other documents. If you actually take that EULA that they put in front of you and you have to agree to, it refers to other documents. And somebody said that it's like some god-awful thing like 300 pages worth of information that you would have to go through to understand what you are agreeing to when you install Microsoft Windows 10. And these are the things that they reserve right to do, okay? So when we sit here and we talk about Cortana listens to you all the time, even Google does this, they pretty much state it. It's just that people don't read those EULAs. They don't know what the deal is. And it's like every service that you go to, even if it's DigitalOcean, for instance, read the EULA, read the license agreement, and if it doesn't jive with what you want to do, move on and do something else.
There are choices out there, I agree. I couldn't say it any better. Most people, and this is what I was saying about earlier, most people will engage in technology of some way, shape, or form, and click, next, are on, and they are using the service now without fully understanding the service. And
they don't know what they gave away.
And then they come back after a news story breaks, or some person on the interwebs or their social networks starts to tell them, hey, did you know? And they get all frustrated at this point. And I look at them and go, did you ever read it to begin with? Well, no. Did you know that this was in there to begin with? No. Well, okay, calm yourself down a little bit, understand what you're doing, and then decide, like you just said, is it the right service for you? And Joe, you and I have talked about this, and I know we're going to dovetail to this conversation here in a few minutes, but for the most part, generally speaking, the general public in a consumer-based world needs just a few myopic services. Now, they are going to expand over time, but for the most part, generally speaking, your next door neighbor, your grandmother, your mom, your dad, people that are just getting online for the first time, they will use a handful of services and they will know very little about the back-end user agreement. We're talking about social networking user agreements. Guess what? Facebook has one, Twitter has one, Instagram has them. They all have user agreements. If you've never read it, go to your social network of choice right after you listen to this podcast and read the user agreement. It will blow your mind.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered that basics.
I agree, and I think we do have a problem, as I was saying, that a divergence of very small minority of people who know or care about privacy, and those that, like Scott's saying, that they just want the end service or product, and they're not doing any research. And I know I'm one of the few people, and I've trained my family for the most part, most of them have listened to me, that they read the permissions when they go to an Android app, for example, and it's like, why does this app that's, for example, I don't know, I don't have one to get off the top of my head, but it's just you'll get an app, for example, that's solitaire, and it wants access to your camera. Well, why does an app for solitaire need access to my camera and need to read my SMS messages? It's like, no. In fact, if there was a heck no with a bunch of exclamation marks, I would hit that. And that's why, like on my phone and tablet, I have almost no apps, because I really, really, really have to have a need for that app. And I know I'm in the minority, and I've trained my family so well, for the most part, like I said, that they're the same way. They're like, I was looking at an app, it looked cool, and then I read the permissions, and it's like, no. And that's why I said I hope Ubuntu Touch and is getting stronger, because I don't want something that's so tied that's not open. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I think most people on that point, they just don't care or know. And I was looking at a hot water heater because I need to get a new hot water heater soon, and you can get them now with Wi-Fi enabled. Why does my hot water heater need to get Wi-Fi enabled?
The Internet of Things.
Well, it's the Internet of extremely insecure things, and of course that's a whole topic we could get into for privacy and security. But I know I am one of those people that really is really big into that. And in fact, I don't understand, quite honestly, back to the credit card things, because that's a big thing, is that although if someone steals all the data on your hard drive, that's not good. If they steal your credit card number, hassle, but there's protections in there. You can never get you can get a new credit card number. You can never get your family photos back if someone does something or just gets them on the internet.
Right, but therein lies personal responsibility to computing. A lot of people don't think about that element of it. They buy a computer. They're using it at their home. The number one thing that people do on their home computers is what? Digital pictures, right? So they've got their smartphone. They carry their smartphone around with them all day long. Boom, boom, boom. They're snapping up pictures of Pokemon here and Pokemon there. Their kids, their grandparents, their dogs, whatever they're doing. They go home. They've got to get that off the phone. So they've got two choices: either a cloud-based service, or they use their local computer at their house to wire up, download those pictures to the system, and then they go on with life. And then they don't think about backing up that system. And then if that system crashes, they're on the phone with said service support for whatever hardware vendor or OS vendor of choice that they decided to go with, and they're yelling to make something magical happen. Right? They don't think about personal responsibility, backing up that data. How important is this data? Right? In a day and age of photos being 99.999, keep going on infinity % digital, your whole life is sitting on a hard drive. Now, I don't know about you, but in the event of a catastrophic emergency, and I have to get out of my house because of some reason or another, the last thing I am going to think about is grabbing a hard drive or grabbing an entire desktop computer and running out the front door. No, I'm grabbing my wife and my children.
No, I'm grabbing my 42.8U rack and running out the door.
Yeah, well, you grab that, I'll grab my family, we'll run out the door. But my point to that is people need to think about down in Louisiana right now with the floods, and all of the things that are happening that could be unpredicted, but it can happen tomorrow. Now, if the floods were happening at my house right now, no problem. I could get out, go on with life, and wherever I decide my new dwelling is, I download my backups. Guess what? Because my backups are sitting in the cloud.
But I think in there, I mean, I agree. I don't disagree that people don't, take care of their backup situations very well. I think though, when you do have some technical limitations of the cloud, just practically speaking, is that if you like you said, just using your example, someone takes a bunch of pictures as people do and throw them up on Facebook, Twitter, whatever. Well, Twitter you can't directly, but whatever. You throw them up on, again, Facebook, or what's that image one? Image, whatever. I can't think of it. Instagram, that's it. So I don't use those services. I don't take photos and put myself up online as far as personal. Hey, look at my food. No one cares. But for those that do, hey, I'm eating at XYZ and check out my plate of food, that they can come home, obviously, and then they can connect wirelessly and put that on a quote cloud. And I disagree with the term cloud. If you go get a Western Digital and plug that in cloud, I don't think that meets the definition of cloud.
No, I'm talking about off-site.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying there's a version of cloud I don't agree with. When you go get a Western Digital or Seagate, you plug it into your wireless router, and that's called a cloud. If you look at, like Western Digital says, it's so easy to set up a cloud, and ASUS says that, but that's local. However, if you're sitting there with like hundreds of gigs of data, most people, even in this day and age, their upload is 1.5 megabits, 3 megabits, and it's like I'm not giving my personal data amount, but let's say you're sitting there with 500 gigs of photos and I don't know, you're something, and it's like, I got to get this online, and I'm transferring over a 1.5 megabit connection. Oh, sure, you might have 30, 40, 50, 100 down, but most people are sitting on 1.5 or 2 or 3 megabits up. It's like takes days and days and days.
Let me give you an example. So here's a real world example for me. So I do true backup to the cloud. It's off-site, it's multi-tiered, it's redundant, and I can access it from anywhere, right? So my current cloud backup is in the hundreds of terabytes. But guess what? My upload is less than 1. So that's an example that you're talking about. But it's a reality check that I had to do. All right, weigh the pros against the cons. Okay, I could go out and buy an external hard drive, stick it on my router, back it up. But if my house burns to the ground, all of my data goes down with it. If I take the time to care and feed for the data that is important to me, then I am always backing up. It's an asynchronous backup, and I had to determine my recovery point, my recovery time objectives, just like you do in business. You have to think about that in your house. All right, so if I have 100 megs worth of images on my smartphone and I don't back up, and my smartphone now falls off of a chair or gets dumped into a bucket of water and it stops working, am I going to be able to get those 100 megs worth of pictures back? Maybe, maybe not. But if I can't be mad at myself because I had the means to back it up. All I had to do was connect it up, transfer those images to my local, which then synchronizes to my cloud backup. That's my responsibility. I have to be held responsible for that. I can't blame anybody else for that. So what is important to you, you will take care of the most effective way that you can do. I agree, we don't have the most opportune upload speeds for most people's internet. And like you mentioned earlier, you're offline for most of your media consumption. Well, for the most part, most people have 10 down and 1 up for a DSL type connection. And I hate to tell everybody out there in the entire world that may be listening to this podcast that might have broadband internet to their local area, that might have 50 down, 50 up, 100 down, 100 up, as some of the providers guarantee equal downs and equal ups. The vast majority of the United States and the world are connected on subpar, substandard, slow connections that are around 10 down and 1 up.
Well, not only that, but it's important to point out that, yes, you may have 30 down and 30 up, but the thing is, I've never seen a server that went any faster than 4.
Well, you're at a port speed.
It depends on where you're going, though. I've seen much faster than that.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, it depends on the service.
Right, and that's my point. But the direction I was trying to go with was, I understand that most people's homes don't have fast upload speeds, but you
No, they don't have
can't.
Google Gig yet.
But and the chances you're probably not going to get Google Gig anytime in your lifetime. But you could still use a cloud-based provider and get a very strong peace of mind that your stuff is backed up, and they're not that expensive. You know, mine cost pennies on the dollar every month to use, and I have 100% of all of my important data sitting backed up in the cloud, multi-tier, just like you talked about earlier, Jeremy. I have a local copy. If I can get my local copy out, that's great. But if I have to egress in an emergency, my data is protected in the cloud.
Okay, go ahead, Jeremy.
The only external service I would trust for my own personal, because I mean, business, you have to be online, at least for website stuff. It's different if you're talking local business to your, you're running, like CyberWeb at our company, CyberWeb Solutions, we're all internet-based. So our data is going to have to be on a server anyway that has web access, although our database servers can't access it. But anyway, so we do run tiered infrastructure there. But the thing is, if I was backing up my personal data to the cloud or the internet or someone else's, the only way I would trust that is if I was personally encrypting that and uploading that in an unencrypted form. I would not trust Carbonite or Mosey on its surface, and I'm not talking about the encryption to the service, like it goes over SSL or TLS or SSH or something like that. I'm talking about when the data's at rest, I have the key, the provider does not have the key, and then there are services that do that, and I can't remember off the top of my head, there's a fairly famous one. And then I would say on the seeding service side, or on the actual getting your data, the first time you need to seed the data, get your big chunk of data up there, because let's say you join a service and you're gonna back up to the cloud, and you have whatever 300 gigs of data you need to get up there or whatever. There aren't many that do it, but there's some where you can actually buy a hard drive and send it to them, and then they can take that and actually get the data, the initial big chunk, to their actual storage. And then there's some solutions that I don't care even if you have a gig download and you have to, and most people don't, I agree, and most people won't get Google Fiber. They're going to have to rely on AT&T Gigapower or Comcast coming out with their 1 and 2 gig connections. What you're going to have to do there is, even let's say for example, I was watching a guy back up his ZFS system, and he had 15 terabytes, and a gig was too slow. He dragged out, he's like, this is going to take days and days and days, so he dragged out something called InfiniBand, and he then transferred over InfiniBand, and that still took, like, I can't remember, like 30 hours or something like that. So it's nice, too, if you're looking for a service and you have a fair amount of data, that you have a service you can send a hard drive to seed it, then do your just sort of daily or weekly backups, however you're doing, if you choose to go that route. But then have the service, and it will cost money, that if a catastrophe happens, you don't have to sit there over even a gig connection, and most people won't have that, downloading, a terabyte of data. You would want to pay the added cost to get them to FedEx you an external hard drive, so that then you can reseed your data back to your stuff. And I mean, this is forgetting the privacy concerns, but like I said, privacy-wise, I don't trust someone else, because I don't know what they're doing with my data.
Okay, but think about that. Pause with your thought right there. You don't trust somebody else with your data, but you would send them a hard drive with unencrypted data to put into their system, because it would have to be shipped unencrypted, because it would have to be ingested by their system.
No, it wouldn't, because all they would have to do, for example, I mean, now we're gonna get really technical, but if you use things like Geli or something like that, you can just ship them where they're just storing the data that's already encrypted. You could encrypt it so it's totally at rest, and then you just do the incremental. Now you would have to rely on a program that would understand to get that data back. But let's say, for example, I mean, we'll throw something out there. You've got 200 gigs of data, and you're sitting on a 30/5, so 30 down, 5 megabits up. Best case scenario, and you're sitting there, and you're like, there's no way. This is going to take a month to transfer. I don't have that kind of time. And what happens if in the middle of the transfer my house burns down, or a tornado hits it, or a flood or something? It's like, I want to get this data to that. You could get an external hard drive. I mean, we're assuming the provider has the ability to do this, which a lot don't, but we're assuming the provider can do this. You could take that hard drive, seed it with your initial amount of data, encrypt it so it's sitting at rest, because all the provider needs to do is simply copy that data on the hard drive, and they can store it at rest where you hold the key. So now you're not going to be able to go through some fancy web interface necessarily and pull that down, which, again, most people aren't going to care. It's like you said, Scott, most people are like, I don't care. I don't care if anyone knows it. I don't care if the government subpoenas this company and asks for my records and they don't know it. It's just happening time and time again. I don't care if some hacker gets into there potentially because it only takes one goofball to misconfigure a firewall, or there's, not apply an update, or, whatever. We can go on and on about the security ramifications. But my data gets compromised in some way. It falls into hands I don't want it to. Or there's some nosy admin there. I mean, we don't know who these people are. You just go get Carbonite or Mozy. I don't know the people there. I don't know what their ethics are. I have no idea. So I would never send a company data. I would never use Mozy. I would never use Carbonite. And I'm just saying I don't do that. The only kind of provider I would choose for my personal data, because now we're talking, not obviously we're going on a consumer stance here, is I would only allow a data to be used, in my opinion, if you could encrypt the data. And they can't see it. All they need to do is just binary copy it, or just do a block copy from that drive into their systems, and they can't decrypt it. Good. I hold the key. I use strong encryption or whatever, and they can't get it. Now, on the flip side of that, the bad thing about that, in a way, if you really want to go down the road, is the good encryption today doesn't mean 10 years from now the files are still stored on there when I asked them to delete it.
Stop.
And,
Stop.
You're making the average consumer's head explode right now.
Yeah. I'm glazing over now. Hold on. No, I'm just joking. No, very good points, actually. I want to change the story. I want to change the subject. I want to move in a different direction before we wrap this thing up. And that is because we had a very interesting conversation about this the other day, me and Scott did. And first, let me lay this out so that the people listening understand. Okay, so when computing first started, and I was just talking about this in a video the other day, the first business-type computer that I ever worked with, there was a computer in a room, and all around the building there were dumb terminals. And it was a Unix system. And Scott, you know what I'm talking about. It was a WTAR. It was that BASIS system. Remember that thing? And there were those green screen terminals all over the place?
Absolutely.
And then Mike Wilson was the admin. He was the guy who worked there, and he came around and said, okay, I'm going to set up a user account for you now. What would you like for your password? And we would go in. In other words, when we worked for this place, and me and Scott both worked for this place at different times, that was our computing experience. That was our business computer. We could not take data out. We could not do anything other than get into this system and do the basic things that it did, which was to, we got news stories from that. We had the wire services, AP, UPI, CBS, sports, scores, all that kind of stuff. You could write a document. There were a few other things you could do with it, but that was it. Okay, so now this was the late 80s, early 90s. Fast forward a couple of years. Now when we have personal computers at home, they weren't connected to anything. I know that's really hard for people in this day and age to understand, but people used to actually go to the computer store and they would buy a computer, and maybe the connection that you would have would be a modem, like a 1200 baud modem that you plugged into a phone, and then you could get to a bulletin board or something like that, which before the internet there were things called bulletin boards, and that was it. So, but anyway, their first computing experiences before the personal computer came along was you're going to log into this central system, everybody gets an account on it. That's almost like a cloud now, isn't it? So then we started going, okay, now everybody gets a personal computer. This is what happened when the Altair came along and Apple and IBM came along and all this other stuff. It's like now we have a computer at home, but they don't necessarily talk to each other. Then they started talking to each other. Then the internet comes along. So now we're starting to get where we have a bunch of local machines that are connected. Fast forward now to almost where we are in some situations, and now you don't have, your computer is useless unless you can get it on the internet. I mean, that's where we're at. It doesn't matter whether you're running Windows, Linux, Mac, whether we're saying that a smartphone is a computer or whether it's a whatever. It doesn't matter. If it's a device that you own, it's pretty much damn useless unless you can get it on the internet. And we're not talking about specific servers or media servers running in a corner, gang. We're talking about like daily driver machines and devices. And so it almost seems to me that we've gone full circle. We're going back to that mini frame, mini computer in the corner there that everybody's connecting to, but the mini frame is not in the building that you're working on. It is all over the world. This is what this cloud computing is about. So, with all of that in mind, what do you think? I mean, right now we spend a lot of time talking about Windows versus Mac versus Linux versus Solaris versus Android versus OS2, anything that's out there. Do you think 10 years from now that that's going to be something we're going to think about, or are we going to be so much into a situation where all of our services are out there somewhere that we're essentially going to be sitting at a dumb terminal?
Do you want me to start?
You go.
Okay. So, my theory is this, and I talked about this earlier, that the desktop is a tool. It's not your destination. It's your starting point. It's what you need to interface with everything that you're going to actually use the computer for. The internet is another thing. We don't need the internet. What we need is the end destination of our workflow. The average consumer does not need a desktop computer. Now, before everybody listening to this podcast starts throwing their monster drink at this screen saying bull crap, the reality is the capacity and the numbers of people who actually need a desktop computer are astronomically smaller this year than they were last year and the year before and the year before. And we're going to see this number continue to decline. You could see the scramble happen if you go to any big box store. What's happening to desktop computers? They're trying to drive these numbers down to the ground just to get you to buy something, because the average person buys a computer and they bring it home and they plug it in and it works and they're happy, and they leave that thing running until the thing stops working. Not a 3-year term like businesses typically do, a 3-year cycle of systems. Maybe you get 5 years out of a system at a business, but if you extend a desktop beyond that in a business, it's typically in an environment where they're strapped for cash or they have no visual direction and foresight for the technology that they're using. But for the average user, they don't need a desktop.
What was it that, not to interrupt, but what was it that somebody said? I've heard this 2 or 3 times at two or three different places. Now, we are not talking about people who create things. We're not talking about those who create programs, media. We're not talking about people who create websites. You guys need the powerful machines. We know that. But the average user of a computer, if you're doing email, watching a little bit of YouTube, what is it? You use about 10% of the capacity of the machine? The rest of it's wasted?
I'd say it's arguably less than that, because most of the part you're using is your interface, your browser to the internet. So you're probably using at best 3% of the actual capacity of your system, meaning that you've gone out and you spent potentially thousands of dollars on this top-end system that the sales guy at the big box store said you needed to have, that will forever never be used in its full capacity. So this is where I get into the argument of the average consumer. The average doesn't need a computer. What they need is an interface. And this rolls back to what you were just talking about, Joe, about you going back to the dumb terminal days. Are we going to go back to seeing green screens? No, that's not going to be happening. But what I do predict to be happening over the next 5, 10, 15 years tops is we're going to see a evolution of smart terminals being introduced into the home. And we've seen some of this stuff over the past decade. We had smart email terminals that you could just plug into a phone line, and Grandma could send you an email without having to have a computer or any know-how how to use a computer.
MailStation. That was the name of that service, MailStation.
Right. So Grandma knew how to use a typewriter. Grandma could use this service. And it's the same thing that we're going to see happen over the next decade, is the dissolve of desktop computing in the home. Because while there will be power users, the average user will need an interface. That interface will have to connect out to the web like you just talked about, because all of the services are now online. You bank online, you shop online, you watch movies online, you communicate socially with people online. Everything is the word online. So that's the key thing to take away from here, is you need to be connected. Most of the things you do locally don't happen. You know, even if you're doing a simple resume, you're going to spruce up, you're going to go look for a job. What does the average college graduate use now? They're not doing stuff locally. They're going out to Google Docs or something like that. They're typing something up, and they're emailing it. It never even touches their local system.
Yeah, there are most people that I talk to on a consistent basis. They live in their browsers. And just absolutely. Now I'm a little different. I'm a power user. I like control. I have an Office suite. I have an email client. I have too many email accounts to deal with using webmail. But you take the average person on the street, and they're using webmail. They're using a browser. They're using Google Docs, Office 365 maybe from Microsoft, which is a subscription. This is what they do. If they take it that far, if they go that far into it. And so it's just kind of interesting that, and I brought this up because as we get more and more into these services, whether they're for good or bad, it's making it so that your operating system at home doesn't really matter all that much. What's your take on that, Jeremy?
Well, I mean, some of it I agree with. I would say that I see. It depends on how you want to define the personal computer. I think that, I mean, the desktop was going to die 10 years ago. Yeah, well, so I think that's a glorified clickbaity term, that the desktop's going to be dead. But even for average computers, I think what you're going to see more are the line getting blurry between really laptops and tablets, because no college kid, at least at this point, is going to want to type their dissertation or do their schoolwork on something that doesn't have. I mean, who's going to want to sit on a tablet and type, their prof, for example, going to school says, their economic prof, type this, or history would be better, type a 10-page history paper on a tablet with just only the touch screen part. Yeah, right. That's not happening. So they're still needing laptops. So I think what you're going to see is a more
what they need is a keyboard, and most tablets have the capability of having a keyboard.
Well,
so
they
you can have that hybrid approach where you don't necessarily need to have a full-blown laptop. And in fact, if you look at a lot of people, they're using the Surface Pros, they're using the iPad Pros. They've got the keyboard, they've got the stylus. They're going at it.
I got to tell you. Hold on just a second.
The Surface Pro isn't selling that well overall, let's face it. Microsoft.
Well, I'm not arguing that it's selling. I'm saying
well, it's what I was saying. I think you're going to see sort of as what I said, a laptop and a tablet. That line is going to get blurry. Is really like what I was saying there, is that, and it does matter in a tablet. First of all, you were saying the power. That's not necessarily true, because you go get some of those cheaper tablets, and by the way, Scott, you said a few $1,000s for your average person. Unless you're buying a Mac, you don't have to spend a few $1,000s. But
well, the thing about it is, I'm just going to cut through this for just a second, is that what happens is that if you take a tablet, and I just saw this the other day, which is the reason why I'm interjecting it. The people who are currently developing Ubuntu Touch, that is going to have the convergence where, it doesn't matter what your device you're on, you're still using Unity, you can pull up all your apps regardless of where they are, all this stuff they're working on. The problem that they're running into is that a tablet, while yes, you can put a keyboard on it, it does not have the power to actually run some of the apps that somebody who is going to create something needs. And let's face it, the thing about it is that if you are using a web-based service to do anything, you are at the mercy of the connection, how quickly that's going to do something. I mean, it's like, for instance...
I don't disagree, and that's what we talked about earlier. There is a definitive line in the sand of going power user versus average user.
Right, but even for average users, if that connection's not real good there, I mean, that can make you bang your head against the wall.
Don't forget, and this is where I agree with Jeremy. The reality is pick up your smartphone. My smartphone that I'm holding in my hand right now has more storage, memory, and processing power than the first computer that put a man on the moon. Okay?
Absolutely.
So people say it's my smartphone. I say it's my mobile computer. I do more stuff on my smartphone than I do on my desktop, my laptop, whatever, you know. So the reality is, and this is what I'm talking about, think about the average user. What do they access on a daily basis? They're on their smartphone. The smartphone is nothing more than a tablet in smaller form, right? It's a tablet with a phone interface into it, because a lot of people don't even use their phones on their smartphones anymore, right? So that's my point, is the plugging in a brick with a screen and a foldable keyboard, whatever, that sits in a laptop bag or whatever.
I think what we've done is we've defined it to the point. I think there's a line somewhere that you have to cross, and if all you do all day is look at your email and play Facebook and Pokemon Go, you don't need a computer.
That's your average person.
And those are the people that are non-computer.
Your moms, your dads, your grandmas, your grandpas, your uncles, your aunts, your friends in general, on a daily basis, access their smart devices more than they do a computer. They don't sit down at a desk. They don't sit down at a desk. And even if they're sitting in a cafe somewhere, what do they have in their hands? They don't typically have a laptop. They either have their smartphone or they have a tablet.
Well, this is true, but I mean, it's like I said. I mean, the thing is that I cannot tell you the number of people that I have heard from who I know for a fact. I know one person for sure. He had a computer, was running Windows XP. It got screwed up with a bunch of viruses. This has been a couple years ago, gang, so this is when Windows XP was still viable, okay? And he decided, well, I don't need this anymore, so I'm going to get me, the first thing that he got himself was a tablet. I don't remember which one it was. It may have been an iPad. And he looked at that and he went, oh, this is great. I mean, I can do all the email and everything and blah, 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 blah. And he ended up, when he got to a place where he wanted to do something that was more creative, I don't remember what it was, he found, oh, I can't do this on this. This is too hard. So his next step up was, now you got to remember, he's gotten rid of his XP computer, and now he's gotten the tablet. And then the next thing he did was he said, well, I would like to, I need something that's more like a computer. So he got a Chromebook. Okay? He was all jazzed about a Chromebook. And that ended up being too limited for him. And then now he's gone back to a computer. And I don't know how many people have done that. I mean, they still have all these devices. So
well, that's the conversation that you and I had, is the evolution of where we're going to see computing in the home. Home is the key word, not business, home. We're seeing some of this dive into the business, and Jeremy, you may or may not see this, but VDI in the workplace, the virtual desktop, if you will, and that's giving the user the experience that they need for a full-fledged compute device, but they don't have to worry about the hardware as far as movable parts, my data sitting here, whatnot. And that gets back into full circle of the cloud, where I firmly believe it's a missing element in the industry. Now, anybody listening right now, they could take this and just give me credit for it.
You know, come on, you don't know. You're going to give away your ideas now, man, you know.
Well, you know, the fact of the matter is, this would take a significant capital investor to see the big picture in this, right? And I have been preaching this for over a decade now, that this is something that is missing in the industry. And that is a service provider that offers out a smart terminal that has keyboard, mouse, and internet access, and access to a virtual computer on the back end for a home end user computing experience.
And we're not talking about a Chromebook.
We're not talking about a Chromebook. We're talking about a smart terminal. If you don't know the term smart terminal, go out there and look it up. What it is it's a embedded monitor, a monitor with embedded technology that allows you to connect into outside service. It could be outside service via a router to an internet provider, an outside service to a cloud-based on-prem inside of a business, through services like VMware and VDI. This all exists, people, and it does sit in a reality scope. If you take a hard swallow of reality, that this is where computing is going to happen for the average computer user. Now, I'm not talking about the power users again. I'm talking about the average person. they think they need a desktop, but they truly don't, because they spend 90% of their time sitting on their smartphone. But they still, in the back of their mind, when they get back to their house, they need to see a big screen. They need to see a keyboard. They need to see a mouse. They need to be able to sit down, touch it, feel it, move it around, manipulate what's on the screen, and that's what they want. But they don't want the headache of going down to the big box vendor, buying a system for a few $100s to run into support issues where hardware starts to fail, the hard drive fails out, and I can tell you that it doesn't matter if it's a $300 system or a $2,000 system. Now I have both Windows systems, I have Mac systems, Windows, Mac, and Linux all in my house. And I can tell you that even a $2,000 system can have a hard drive fail within the first 30 days,
Exactly.
60 days, 90 days. It's all mechanical. There's no point in time where it says, well, I've ran long enough and now it's time for me to fail. It doesn't matter. It could fail the second it pulls itself out of the box. Sure, there's some QC that's supposed to be on the back end before they ship it out to you, but the reality is it is a mechanical device. It will fail at some point in time. So that's where I think that the home user is going to experience an evolution in home computing that we have not seen yet in home computing. Will it require a more robust connectivity to the home? Perhaps. But I can tell you that the average person doesn't need 50 down, 50 up.
What do you think, Jeremy?
Well, I think obviously it's going to change, but I think the cloud is more overrated than it really is. I think that the bottom line is, you talk about not wanting to go spend the money on a computer, and that's true that some people don't, but the flip side is people are already getting tired and hanging on to their mobile devices because they don't want to go spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars for all the family member to constantly get a new mobile device every 2 or 3 years. And I understand that, yes, right now it's more like the analogy of comparing where computers, well, they've already advanced a long time, but especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, constantly the graphic cards were getting stronger or whatever. So, you buy a computer and 6 months later it's like, that's a dinosaur. So we're starting to see some of that, but not all cell phones are equal. I mean, you go buy one of those $50 blue phones, it doesn't run like getting a Nexus device, for example. They're not, just like computers, they're not equal. You can't just, compare one, oh, it's a computer. Well, and then people want to put all these apps on them that chew through all their memory and slow their systems down. So I think that we'll see a change.
But what if, here's the scenario, what if there was a service for the average home computer user, average, keyword there, that they could lease out on a service provider basis for dollars a month that would give them a full computing experience, that even at the end of 2 years, 3 years, that device that's sitting in front of them is still valuable, because on the back end, the dial tone, the electrical service, you don't care what's happening. You just know what you need, and you could pay by the drink, or you could subscribe to the services that you need. So if I need a system with dual processors, and I need 4 gigs of memory, and I need 2 terabytes of hard drive space, and I need the ability to connect in USB devices like a local printer or scanner or something like that, should I ever want to use some sort of local device, I could do that. And I could pay pennies on the dollar versus going to the big box store and forking out hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for a very top-end computer that will last me 3 to 5 years, that's not going to be out of date and out of spec 30 days after I bought it. I realized, oh, I didn't buy enough, so I skimped out on bought the $300 computer when I should have bought the $1,000 computer. If that type of service existed today, do you think people would like it? And the operating system of your choice, because you could choose Windows, you could choose Linux.
Any desktop.
Any desktop. Would that be a service that the average consumer, in your opinion, could consume and see value in?
I think there's a market for that. How widespread it is totally remains to be seen. But for starters, our internet connections are nowhere near good enough to handle that kind of constant. Because you're talking about, we have bad network latency in the general internet, and you're now talking about having to stream over a standard consumer connection when people around my house, for example, get on the Nextdoor site and constantly complain that they can't even stream get Netflix, which is buffering it. And now you're talking about having to deliver a video stream over that. and in most places they're locked by Comcast or AT&T or Charter or Verizon or whatever, and those guys are not really making much advancements in that type of technology to really smooth that out. So I mean, one day potentially, but there's still a lot that the cloud cannot solve. So I think any service has the ability to make some money or do whatever. I mean, for example, desktop computing or laptop physical, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, we've been having the death of the desktop for 15 years. So
well, I can say this. I can say this. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I think that's where I think there are definitely people who would fit that niche, but it's just like the mobile device. If you get a device, first of all, nothing is, obviously you can't eliminate all problems. I mean, we have set-top boxes now, and I know that's something actually the providers want to do. The providers such as the Comcast, Charters, Time Warners, whatever, and AT&T and all that, they're trying to invest in technology because they would like to get rid of that DVR type box or receiver box that has more of the sophistication sitting on the desk and your not just desk, your wherever your entertainment center, and they want to have more something like a little Roku and then do DVRing and stuff in the cloud, quote unquote, on their stuff instead of having it go, so that way you have a smaller box because they don't like supporting all the hard drives and all that other stuff. But I mean, obviously, as soon as you start talking anything hardware, it's going to die. People are going to abuse it. You're still going to get lightning strikes. You're still going to have things go wrong with it. It's still going to, I mean, there is no box made that's endlessly upgradable. I don't care what it is. I mean, they have to redo boxes on side of the house for, for cable lines or something because new technology comes out. So even if you had a little box you could buy and stick on there, it's still going to technically have a chip. It may be a dumb terminal, but still, it's not going to last forever. And what will happen is I can guarantee you most companies are going to put the cheapest amount in there, just like they make really super cheap DVRs and super cheap receivers that constantly die. And I know tons of friends and family on Comcast that are constantly cycling through these stupid receivers that are constantly dying on them, and they get another one provided, but it then dies again, and it dies again, and then they're getting another one, and some of my family's literally pushing close to a dozen of these stupid receivers that keep dying. So they'll make these cheap receivers, and then you'll, whatever, and then you're going to be dependent on your internet connection, and now you're talking video, so any stutter is going to be noticeable, and you go to move your mouse around, it doesn't move because it's crunching in some cloud thing, and so I don't see it. I think it would be. I think what you're going to see first is more what I said. More the line between a tablet and a laptop get a lot more blurry than it is even now. Long before you see a service, even for the average home user, that, I mean, they can't even get Nest always working right. And come on, it's just doing a thermostat thing. And you read about all kinds of things popping up there. Now you're talking about needing to pipe an always-on, low latency connection, so when you move your mouse, it doesn't go stop, and then all of a sudden jerk to the other side of the screen. When we can't even, people sit there and wait for their Netflix thing to buffer.
I agree.
Okay, well, I want to tell you, I would say this about that, is that I will never buy a desktop again. I mean, that's where I'm at, and I will never do it again. I will either buy, actually what I probably, really the next thing that I'm going to buy if I buy a new computer is going to be one of those little Intel NUCs, or like a System 76 Meerkat, which is a little 5-inch box that has 8 gigabytes of memory in it, and it has an i7 processor in it with 8 cores, and there's no moving parts. So as far as the actual physical boxes are concerned, I think the days of having the tower under your desk are just about over with. I mean, you can USB any device into that thing you want to. So if you want media support, well, a USB DVD Blu-ray drive, well, that's $50. Just add that on. We don't need these boxes anymore. So physically speaking, I won't do that. That's absolutely sure. Okay, so let's go ahead and try and wind this thing down, gentlemen. First of all, I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes here. If you have a closing statement on this you want to throw in there, last thoughts, that sort of thing. Jeremy, go.
Well, I would say, based on your comment, that the desktop, or comments that have been made, the desktop will become it already is a minority, and it's definitely going to increasingly become a minority. But I don't think for a second that it's going to totally disappear. There are many advantages to having a desktop. For example, you need to just upgrade the video card. swap in a new video card. Try and do that with a laptop. And so PCI, I mean, it gives you just the ability to have so many more things connected to it. You don't have to have boxes hanging off your desk constantly, even if you go external sound or external whatever you want, external DVD drive or whatever. Then there's another box sitting down there, and it needs power. It has to take a USB port. You just throw that in a desktop, good to go. It's got power internal. You need a more powerful power supply. Can't get out on a desktop, slap in a new one. So I don't think that those are going to disappear, but I do agree totally that they will become fewer and fewer. And also try and do some, like a media center or something on a Meerkat if you want to have any type of RAID, whether that's hardware or ZFS or Butter or something like that. Good luck on doing that on a Meerkat. But the thing is, I don't disagree that that's where a lot of people will need it. I'm not saying that. So I think for certain creators, you're never going to see it's going to be a long time. We're decades away from the quote day that the desktop's just never around.
Right.
Now, as far as the cloud goes, just general computing on the cloud, obviously we discussed two different paths here. You have the business side of it, and you have the personal or consumer side of it. And we're, of course, going to continue to see everybody, it seems like, is rushing to put their product connected to the cloud, like cars. That's a great idea. Like the Jeeps that were hacked, and literally hackers over the internet could turn off the engines and stuff like that, as shown by the Twitter guys and some of that. So everyone's trying to get some part of their product on the cloud without understanding really what that means as far as security and privacy goes. Because I mean, they're not a IT security company, and so we will continue to see the growth of cloud services. As I said, we all pretty much agree here, the three of us. That's a term that's used too much. On the business side, we will obviously continue to see cloud grow, and really, if you get down to it, I mean, you could say it was a cloud. Cloud's kind of become, really, it's the next generation cluster that used to be called, where you'd have multiple computers all working together. And again, as I said, in '99, I had a commercial website, and you could call that the cloud because I rented storage and space to run a website on someone else's actual hardware. So that will definitely continue to grow. I personally see, I think even with all our smartphones, all our tablets, I think right now we're just as a society really big into them because they're like the latest thing, and I don't think they're going anywhere. But I'm starting to see a little bit of pullback. It's just like social media. The numbers are starting to show people are growing less and less that sort of craze. I got to be on Facebook all the time, or I got to be on Twitter all the time. Facebook and Twitter are both admitting they're starting to see sharp declines, and people always wanting to be like connected to Facebook. Again, they're not going away. I'm not claiming that anytime soon. But I think as humans, we tend to, it's the shiny object of the month, and then we kind of go back to something else, and they still stay in our lives. So, and if you start looking at smart devices like tablets and phones, I mean, people right now are getting really disgruntled about, what, I have to upgrade it again? I just spent a bunch of money, even if you have a contract, $200-300, or if you go buy an unlocked phone, I mean, go buy an unlocked iPhone or Galaxy or something. I prefer the Nexus line because I'm not going to be locked into it, but whatever. So I think that we will, though, obviously continue to see the growth in cloud. It's just going to, you guys said it perfectly. We don't really know what we've built as a society, and like anything, there's going to be growing pains. There's learning. How do we update all this stuff? I mean, to me, we didn't really cover that, but digitally speaking, from security, how do you update that? I don't care if we have a dumb box. There's still software of some type running on that dumb box or dumb terminal or whatever you want to call it. It still has to have something to do an initial boot up. Well, those aren't going to be just, no device is ever going to be, well, you put it out there and it's done. From a security standpoint, as soon as you connect something to the internet, to your network, your home network, boom, it is a security risk, and it needs updates. Now, often devices, IoT, Internet of Things, don't get those updates, but they really do need those updates.
Yeah, okay, so Scott, your thoughts?
From a business perspective, cloud is here. Cloud is here to stay. Businesses are realizing that they want to get out of the data center business. They realize that their core competencies are not in data center. Their core competency is in whatever product or service that they develop and sell. That's what their core competencies are, and they've realized that they've expended a lot of money into the data center world, and their data centers are old. They're aging. They don't want to upgrade again because they built them back in the 80s. So now they're looking for the next route to be more fruitful in their bottom line, and getting out of the data center business is the first line that they could start to trim the fat off and start to subscribe into services through the major players that are out there in the PaaS and SaaS space. That's platform as a service and software as a service place. We see that happening all the time. We see system integrators thriving and growing as businesses realize that they want out of the data center business and getting more into the cloud. I think that DR in the cloud is going to thrive over the near future and the near distant future as well. The DR in the cloud is going to be the biggest thing. App dev testing in the cloud is going to be primary before I see a lot of people jumping ship and starting to put their production workloads in the cloud. But this is something that's been going on for decades now. The cloud is not anything new. It's been around for a long time, and the evolution of business to the cloud is going to continue to go that route. Now, for the consumer side of the world, I think that the average person is going to continue to thrive for more mobility. They want to have more unplugged, untethered experiences to their compute. That's going to be made on tablets. It's going to be made on laptops. It's going to be made on smartphones. It's going to be made on something other than a desktop. The average consumer. The power users will still go out and they will buy the big boxes to stick underneath their desk because they do want that flexibility as they're developing or they're gaming or whatever they're doing, that they do have that flexibility to piece a system together and make it very custom. That's like the difference between a person brewing coffee at their house or if they go to a coffee shop and they want a very customized experience on a day-to-day basis. I could go ride a bike out in the front yard, but if I want a very customized entertainment experience, I'm going to go to an entertainment park because they have customized that to my needs, my wants, my desires, right? The same thing's going to happen in computers. The average user in a home computing experience will get away from the desktop, will get away from the laptop. They will go to more mobile, more untethered, more unconnected, more online as the years progress. I guarantee you this, mom and pops are going to stop using these desktop computers. They don't need them. What they need is the social media. They need the online experience of whatever service that they're using, banking, shopping, whatever. It's all online. And especially if you live in a very rural area, you tend to do more online than you would see people that live in a metropolitan area. And if you're in a metropolitan area, you are offered more fruitful online experiences than those in a rural area. So it's a kind of a fine balance between rural and metro computing, but I do think that end user computing experience is going to be an untethered experience. And look in your pocket. That thing you're carrying around is the best computer that you've ever had. The smartphone that you have has got a camera on it. People ask me all the time, what's the best camera I own? It's the one I have in my pocket all the time because it's there, it's ready to be used at all times. And back up your data. Don't ever discount the importance of your data. Don't ever second guess that it won't happen to me. Look at people in the South right now with all of the storms. They're flooded. They had to leave their homes. Always put a disaster plan in place for your computing experience, your data. How are you going to get it out of your home if an emergency happens? And you don't think about it during an emergency when your house is on fire or there's a flood coming in your basement. You want to get out and you want to safeguard yourself and your family, protect your data.
All right, cool. Thank you, gentlemen, both of you, for coming along and doing this. This is really cool. And this has been another episode of Mr. Server and Mr. Desktop, or Mr. Desktop and Mr. Server, whichever way you want to look at it. And we've talked to Mr. Cloud, Scotty D. Now, as far as Jeremy O'Connell at Cyberweb Solutions is concerned, you can find a link to his website down there, and you can talk to him. If you'd like to. He offers cloud-based service, of course. Scotty D, do you want to add some sort of a link where people can contact you, or are you just...
check out the link in the video description below. My email account will be there, my Twitter account there. You can contact me online on social. I'd be more than happy to address and communicate with you.
All right, well, that's very cool. Thank you. This was awesome. I enjoyed listening to you guys going back and forth. And thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Scott, both of you, for taking time out of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, so what we're going to do here is I'm just going to remind you to check out Easy Linux on the web, check out Easy Linux on Facebook, check out Freedom Penguin for lots of great stories about Linux, and we're going to wind this one up. I don't know when the next one's going to be, but when it is, I'll let you know. Thanks for listening.